Okay, so this week we'll be looking at some of the changes that went on in Europe roughly between 1900 and 1914, the start of the Great War. And some of those changes we've been seen taking place over a roughly 100-year period from the fall of Napoleon in 1814 to the beginning of the First World War. And so we've addressed key themes that are often associated as contributing causes to the war. If not very directly, then certainly very indirectly, but still important to understand. And so you've seen now that Europe has, these large empires spread throughout the world. Some countries have much larger empires than others, right? Great Britain has the largest. And one of the things that developed was the fact that Germany and England were the two most industrialized countries in Europe and very much trade rivals. Germany had a growing population. What's more is that the German university system became the darling of Europe. The university system we use in the United States, for the most part, is based on the German model that was developed in the late 1800s. Additionally, it was there that a number of very modern fields that are still with us, become fields themselves. For example, the professionalization of, say, social science, what those are. The first social science PhDs are awarded in Germany. Some of the first American PhDs in that degree itself awarded outside of divinity and some other traditional fields are awarded in Germany. So what happens is people with German PhDs come back to the United States and help develop sort of the graduate school system we have in this country. So Germany has this, on the one hand, as it's nationalizing, it has this great deal of respect for some of its institutions, which include the respect for sort of German learning in education, science, technology. And these are supporting a large German industrial growth and economic expansion. England, of course, had a long tradition of this, so there was always a great deal of respect and still had a large empire. But one of the things that changed is the integration of that technology into the military. So all aspects of life, of course, are affected by these new technologies. And so quite often, the knock on the First World War is that you have, generals who don't understand the technology that they're using that's now available to them by 1914. And so you get bogged down in this horrible trench warfare. That's really not true in some respects. In fact, as we'll see, the generals knew all too well what their new technologies could do. And in fact, as we talk about planning this week, one of the things we'll talk about is that many of them were hoping to plan a way to ensure a short war, because they understood that a long war might become that war, a dreaded war of attrition, which would be too costly in terms of lives and fortune, and may very well be the undoing of an entire empire. You also have a difference, is that Napoleonic armies were not very large. Large armies really hadn't preceded that. So what do I mean? For example, when we think of the American War for Independence during the American Revolution, Washington's army on his best day might have been between 20 and 25,000 men. So these armies are smaller in scale. By the time we're talking about World War I, so within 100 years, you're talking about each country mobilizing several million men. So one of the reasons why this could happen was the advance of technology. The development of railroads over that period of time, plus improved communications such as the telegraph and the telephone, although spotty and unreliable during this war, certainly there. You have better methods of manufacturing weapons and better methods of manufacturing and preserving food to get that and to feed your army. So all of those logistical questions and concerns can be addressed now, and so you can support overwhelming numbers of soldiers. And the thought was that these large armies, you'd have a larger peacetime army, and then the real kicker is that you'd have a large number of reserves. So some policies in these countries required a mandatory 2 years of service for every able-bodied man, and as we'll see, that gets stretched. So you have larger and larger armies. So that way, if you were ever mobilized, right, mobilization of your army in war, you would have your regular army, but then you could fold in several million men in terms of reservists who had been training, but not every single day. Kind of like what we would see in our own today, present National Guard or Army Reserve or Air Guard Reserve, or, what you got is some, training, every now and then, but it's regular, and then you incorporate them with the regular army, and you have a very large and overwhelming force. You also have the establishment of officer war colleges. Basically, we have a war college system in the United States, and other countries do too. The British War College is at Sandhurst. In fact, John Keegan, the author of our book, is a professor at Sandhurst. So, officer war colleges become training grounds. Before this time, in the days before, say, the French Revolution, before the advent of liberalism, you have what under the old regime, the regime of kings and things, people learned their officer skills, their generalship, in the seat, through experience, through time. With what arose in the 1800s were schools designed to teach officers all of the important skills they would need. And with the advent of using, say, railroads, trains, and other new technologies, one of the things officers would have to learn at these war colleges were how to manage effective timetables, schedules, and plans. How far an army could march on one day and come up. So they became trained in these formulas, but these formulas were crucial to, say, good, solid war planning. They learned to handle logistics and, of course, tactics and strategies. Their goal is sort of how to gain advantage for their country, not necessarily resolve crisis. That becomes something for the diplomats. But what we start to see also in these countries is a growing separation, or a reinforced separation. So what you've seen is the Army is sort of in their own thing, the Navy's in their own area, and the diplomats are in their own area. And what they don't have is some sort of a National Security Council type body like we have in the United States that brings all of these people together to talk to each other and develop a coordinated policy or strategy. So the Army has its beliefs in its strategies, the Navy has its belief in its strategies, and the diplomats have their beliefs in their strategies. They tend to distrust each other, and they are three different bureaucracies that have three different agendas, and they're all fighting for what we would call primacy, or the centrality of their view of things on an administration, or upon, say, an emperor like Kaiser Wilhelm II or Tsar Nicholas. So you also have the bleeding of nationalist sentiment becomes invested in armies, so that armies themselves can become symbols of nationalism. In the case of France, as we saw with the Dreyfus affair, nationalism sort of helps divide that army in some ways. And what we've seen is that it also leads post-Dreyfus to the army being distrusted and sort of mistreated in their eyes. And that didn't help build the confidence or the spirit of the army. But nationalist sentiment also affects the army in that both in, say, France and in Germany, there is concern. While they want more bodies, they certainly want more men to to have, at least for reserves, there are limits. And those limits mean, for example, Germany, for example, Bismarck is worried about recruiting too many people, conscripting too many people, because he was worried that the people of the cities, especially these socialists, would corrupt good nationalist Germans from the countryside. In France, the fear was that you would have these corrupting influences bleeding into the army, and disrupting the élan de guerre, the spirit of fighting, the spirit of war in the soldiers. So you also have still that racial divide and ethnic divide in armies, and so these become targets. But we'll also see is that they become focal points for the right wing, to focus on, to use as examples of, the people bleeding for this country and needing the support of the masses. Now, you've heard mentioned quite a few times in your reading someone named Bismarck, Otto von Bismarck. Bismarck is an important character in some of these ideas. He helps sets the table for a lot of what went on in Europe after 1870, and so I figured I would mention him in this section. The unification of this area, Germany, is the result of bold action by Bismarck. When Bismarck was in charge of really the diplomacy and the foreign policy of Germany under Kaiser Wilhelm I, and before, so what was happening was Kaiser Wilhelm was in charge of Prussia, one of many German states. And during the 1850s and 60s, they fought wars of unification, unifying ethnic Germans. But there's this area here between Belgium, the Netherlands, and Switzerland, in this area between Germany and the French-German border. And that's Alsace-Lorraine. It's traditionally, fought over by France and Germany. The people who live there speak French, some speak German, and there are valuable resources there, mineral resources and things. And Germany wanted an empire that united all ethnic Germans, and we've talked about that with nationalism. But here's where nationalism really influences, and kicks in motion major concerns and policy. So, goading France into a war, the Franco-Prussian War of 1870s, right, where France, was goaded into crossing the border, attacking Germany. Germany swings around, surrounds Paris, and besieges it and collapses the French. They surrender. German unification and the German Empire is declared in a peace ceremony at Versailles Palace. And, France, of course, insulted. But what Bismarck was doing was developing sort of this larger Germany. And it was a Germany based on this nationalist idea of ethnic Germans all together under one political roof, so to speak. He is a conservative, so any real liberal advances in Germany is something Bismarck would have fought against. And he was dismissed by Kaiser Wilhelm's replacement, successor, Kaiser Wilhelm II. The dismissal of Bismarck was also unfortunate because one of the things Bismarck always worried about was the fact that in any strategic situation, possible war, is that Germany and Austria had been traditionally somewhat rivals and hadn't always had the best relationship. The other problem is that Germany is sort of caught, right? If we think about the powers of Europe, Spain has this nice mountain chain, basically on the border of Spain and France. It's also been neutral. England has a major protector called the North Sea, the English Channel, the Irish Sea. So it has a very well-guarded border because of the ocean. And it has a strong navy, so any attempt of attacking England, you'd have to overwhelm its navy, and that'd be very difficult, if not impossible. There have been a few attempts, and only one successful one. The last time England was successfully invaded was 1066 AD, Every other attempt after that has failed miserably. So, I guess that's a pretty good record, right? France, Germany, Austria-Hungary, Italy. It has the mountains here, but still Italy, and Russia. All of them have land borders. Maybe some mountains, maybe some rivers, but for the most part, not much separating them from their neighbors. And so the fear is always that their neighbors are a threat, that they become rivals. And in this case, Germany really feels the pinch because we have a German sandwich, if you will. Now I could, highlight that so you remember by saying, sandwich. But if you think about it, here we have the French threat that can threaten Germany here. And so the French can threaten Germany here. The Russians can threaten Germany on its eastern border, right? So if we think about this, I'm just going to freehand draw here, so please. The fear is that, you have, this Germany. There's a freehand. Sorry, I'm getting used. Okay, so I'm drawing here, hopefully. So we have France threatening Germany from its western border. And notice this corridor that I've just drawn the cross brace on. It's a narrow corridor, right? Well, not totally narrow, but somewhat narrow. Switzerland here is neutral. Belgium and the Netherlands are neutral. And in fact, Belgian neutrality is something that has been guaranteed by England and France since 1839. And so there was an international agreement saying that these countries would protect the neutrality of Belgium. Belgium is a small country. It doesn't have a large army. And by making this promise, it meant that anyone attacking or violating Belgian sovereignty would automatically invite reprisal from France, from England. And so if you were trying to, say, just have a war with France, you would involve England and other powers that were mutually guaranteeing Belgium's neutrality just by crossing into it. So that's always the danger. Now, it's not. There were questions like saying, do we really believe this would happen? The Germans certainly questioned, no one would risk this massive, horrible war just protecting little old Belgium. We'll see what happens. In the East, Germany also has a problem because if it's fighting a war, it also has the Russian problem. Now, this is what modern-day Poland, but Poland had been basically split up. Part of Poland was taken by Germany up here, and part of Poland was taken by Russia down here. So, Germany has a Russia problem, which is Russia has a lot of people, and it has the problem that if it went to war, France and Russia had been strengthening their relationship over many years, which meant that France and Russia had started to sign alliances or defensive agreements. Basically, if one was attacked, the other would help, that sort of thing. Germany, the problem for Bismarck is he has to avoid at all costs the ever potential of a two-front war that could basically advance on Germany from the east and the west, crushing it and threatening Berlin. So this German sandwich he has to sort of prevent. So how do you do it? In Bismarck's day, when he was in charge of foreign policy, he made a series of agreements. And the importance of those agreements were that he would work on sort of a deals with France and with Russia to prevent what could be seen as horrible outcomes. So he would, for example, get an assurance from France that an agreement that he'd been signing for years, this sort of triple insurance, saying that if France, France would not attack, or Russia would not attack, they would sign this agreement, and they kept renewing it. One of the problems he had, of course, was that it was not renewed. It was not renewed by Kaiser Wilhelm II when it was up for renewal in 1890. It was repudiated. One of the important things about this is called the Reinsurance Treaty, and it had been updated for multiple times. But Bismarck had signed a reinsurance treaty with Russia in 1890, even though it was later repudiated, so it was never in effect. The idea was that Russia would remain neutral unless Germany attacked France. And Germany agreed that it would remain neutral in any war unless Russia attacked Austria-Hungary. So what he did effectively was try to stave off the Russian problem. And, of course, the problem is ultimately they would remain neutral unless Germany attacked France. However, that means if France attacks Germany, right? If France attacked Germany, Russia would be staying out of the war. So, it was thought that this might strengthen relations with the Russians. Germany was experiencing some growth in relations with the Russians. There's a good deal of respect for German institutions by a number of regular Russians, but that's starting to have backlash, as you're reading about. Austria-Hungary has some problems too. Austria-Hungary is a very conservative joint monarchy. The Austrian side is ethnically German. The Hungarian side has multiple ethnicities and religions, Slavs, right, for example. And you also have these new areas in Slavic countries all emerging on its border. Now, these had been part of the Ottoman Empire, but they had won their independence from the Ottomans. The problem is also that ethnic Serbs and other Slavs are still in the Hungary part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And with the feelings of nationalism, some of these countries are looking for a united Slavic kingdom or country, nation of Slavs. Others are looking to unite all ethnic Serbs, right? So this poses a real problem on the border of Austria-Hungary. Additionally, as Austria is also basically an ally of Germany, the other problem it has is a Russian problem. So if you see this, Austria-Hungary has problems on three sides, right? Let's follow my arrows here. 1, with those provinces. 2, on its western or eastern border. And 3, on its north and eastern border. It has this long common border with Germany, but other than that, it's got Russians here, and then Romanians here, and Serbians here, and Bulgaria will actually ally with them, and Montenegrins here. So it's also in a rough position. The Austro-Hungarian Empire was actually quite weak, but also very conservative. It was repressive, and you see some of the more conservative elements take over in Germany as well. So these are some of the key problems. When Bismarck was in office, he tried to balance those through diplomacy. Bismarck is removed, and when he is removed, he's replaced by people who are maybe less skilled than he was, and you also have the growth and reputation of General von Schlieffen. And so as you start to get into the plans in these countries, we'll talk more about Schlieffen. So what you see are these countries developing plans which is another thing. They make war plans. They are planning for the fact, what they see as a reality, that there will be a war, and they believe that plans will help them because they understand what new technology can do. And so they're hoping to make war so unbearable and so decisive early by having a quick strike, a victorious strike early with massive force, overwhelming force. The idea is that it would end the war early, because you don't want a protracted war. So, what you have by 1914 are plans. And as we'll see, some of these plans are built on quite wishful thinking.